Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us. Today, we will be discussing the FDA's proposed rule for food traceability. We are recording this presentation, and you can expect a follow-up email in the coming days with a link to this recording. We'll have a Q&A session afterwards as well. My name is Kim Knoll, and I work for Bureau Veritas within the food safety team. I'll be introducing our speaker and hosting the Q&A session that follows. In case you are new to Bureau Veritas or have not worked with us yet, we are a global leader in testing, inspection, and certification services. If I or anyone from my team can ever be of assistance to you, please do reach out. We'd certainly welcome an opportunity to hear from you. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Mr. Bob Strong. We are thrilled to partner with Bob for today's presentation. Bob certainly has a wealth of knowledge. He has over 5 decades of experience to share with us. He has worked in various sectors of the industry, including the supply chain and for third-party certification bodies. Bob is well known as a subject matter expert on many food safety related topics, and he currently works as an independent food safety consultant and certified lead instructor. Well, thank you so much, Bob, for putting this information together for us, and I will let you take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, and I'm very happy to be able to bring this presentation to you, where we're going to be talking about where is the FDA going with regard to requiring records from you on traceability on certain products. And the reason why they are doing this is because obviously they've had problems in the past finding out where contaminated ingredients are, what products they went into, where they were sold. And it's taken a long time to be able to identify and get those products out of the marketplace. And every day they're in the marketplace, somebody else could be getting sick and somebody could be dying. So we're going to talk about what is it and how do I comply? Well, it's part of the FDA's new era of smarter food safety. And this is covered as part of FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, as you know, went into effect on January the 4th, 2011, when President Obama signed it into law. And we've gradually seen different parts of it go into effect over the last 10 years. But not all of it's in effect yet, and even things that are in effect can be done better. So the FDA is asking you now to help them rapidly identify and effectively identify recipients of contaminated foods of human health concern. So therefore, what we're going to be talking about applies to all companies who manufacture, process, pack, or hold foods on the food traceability list. And it actually goes back to the farmer and somebody who's raising chickens for egg laying, etc. The things we're going to finish up talking about is what is your involvement? What are you going to have to do? And we're going to talk about things called key data requirements and critical tracking events, which when this becomes law, you will have to do it versus right now we hope you're doing it and it's voluntary. But if you're not doing it, you're going to have to do it when this becomes law. And at the end, we'll talk about when will this become law. So the first thing I wanted to go over with you is what is the food traceability list? In other words, what products are on this, because it doesn't apply to every product. So the FDA developed a list of high-risk ingredients because those are the ones basically, based on that definition, high risk, are more likely to get people sick, have a history of getting people sick, and unfortunately have finished up having people die. So this list also includes those foods made from these ingredients. So if you're making a food from ingredients on the high-risk list of ingredients, then your product goes on the high-risk list. These foods are mainly ready to eat. Therefore, what we're saying is the consumer is going to do very little with your food except eat it. They're not going to cook it or do anything in the way of a heat step, which could possibly take care of a hazard. They are going to do, in some cases, minimum preparation. But they may very well just eat the product as it comes and therefore eat it raw. So the FDA has issued a list of foods that they also consider raw, which are unlikely to be consumed without a further step. So they are trying to help you with the list of products that they feel you're going to have to keep good records on, and ones where they feel it would be very unusual if the customer would eat it raw. But that doesn't mean the customer won't eat it raw, but it would be rather unusual if the customer ate some of the products raw. So if you want to look at that list, you can look at that list. We're going to stick today to the list that was going to require these records. What are we concerned about? We're obviously concerned about what the FDA covers, calls foreseeable hazards. In most cases, biological. Therefore, there are things that are going to make people sick and possibly kill them. But it also could be the fact that you've allowed the bacteria to grow to high numbers, and therefore you form toxins. And even though there could be a heat step coming later, toxins are not removed by heat. So the FDA has taken a look at what's happened over the last 30 or 40 years, as well as what's happened in obviously the last 10 years. And they determined that cheeses, other than hard cheeses, soft ripened, semi-soft cheese and fresh cheese, maybe pasteurized or unpasteurized milk, could be a potential problem if you are not controlling the hazards. And they refer to Jalisco cheese back in 1985 in Los Angeles, which actually finished up with a person putting out cheese that was eaten by a lot of Hispanic mothers, pregnant people at that time who were expectant mothers, and they finished up losing their babies. Either they were stillborn or they were miscarried. And they believed that they were eating safe cheese, and it actually wasn't as safe as they believed. It should have been made with pasteurized milk, and was actually made with unpasteurized milk. I think you're all familiar with Peanut Corporation of America, so therefore the FDA is considering nut butters to be on this ready-to-eat food traceability list. And obviously they refer to Peanut Corporation of America being one of the companies that put out put out peanut butter with salmonella in it and resulted in 9 deaths. Seafood is another category that the FDA has also included in this list. And that is because obviously a lot of these fish, if they're temperature abused, can form scromboid. And scromboid is something that causes us to have an effect on it. For some of us, it's mild. For some of it's more serious. You'll notice it doesn't call saleriforms. It doesn't cover saleriforms, and that's catfish, because this is an FDA regulation proposed, and therefore it doesn't cover USDA products. And catfish is now part of USDA. Covers crustaceans, and we've just had an incident this year of salmonella in shrimp. And it covers the mollusks and bivalves, and we've had oysters with notavirus again this year. So again, if those are products that you handle, then you would be being required to do some record keeping in the next couple of years. Fruits and vegetables, all types, and particularly fresh cut, where we know the consumer is going to take your product and they're going to just eat it. They're not going to do any heating. They're not going to do anything like freezing it. They're just going to eat it. And we did have a problem back in 1996 with Cyclospora coming out of Guatemalan raspberries. And the only thing the FDA could do after they tried to investigate it by even going to Guatemala, what caused the problem, they couldn't come up with a problem. So therefore they banned Guatemalan raspberries, and they're still banned today. Deli salads, all types, except meat salads. Why not? Meat salads, again, comes under the USDA. So if you're into that, meat salads are covered. Sprouts, all varieties of sprouts, all types of tomatoes. And we had a problem with Florida tomatoes back in 2014 with salmonella. This is giving you an insight into the type of products that the FDA is going to require records on. If we haven't hit something that you are currently using or you're not currently involved with, then up to now, there's nothing that you're going to be required to do. But we got more in the list. Leafy greens has had a history of being a problem over the last 20-odd years. And the biggest problem just recently was romaine lettuce coming out of California, coming out of Salinas. But it also covers iceberg, leaf, and romaine as well, kale, chicory, watercress, chard, arugula, spinach. And these are commodities, obviously, that are coming in with minimum preparation being done in a plant, and quite often nothing being done on them when you buy them at retail in the produce section. Peppers, all varieties, herbs, fresh herbs like parsley, cilantro, and basil, and cucumbers. And sometimes you're going to buy those in the produce section at the supermarket. Sometimes you're going to buy them as an ingredient in a prepared meal. we need to know, or the FDA needs to know, where are these coming from? So what we're going to be talking about is how can these be traced back to the field, and then how can they be traced forward to the product that you're eating? And the quicker we can do this, the quicker we can get these products out of the marketplace, because a lot of times the FDA does not know the source and therefore can't go back to where they were grown, or doesn't know where they were sold, or doesn't know what products they went into, and we've got to get on top of this. So therefore, melons is another category. Cantaloupes, honeydew, watermelon. And we had a big problem back in 2011 with the cantaloupes coming out of Colorado. We had 33 people die from listeria. Who would have believed that 33 people would die from eating cantaloupe, which we would consider to be somewhat of a safe product? We had tropical fruit punch, tree fruits. We've had problems again with some of the problems like Mexican papayas, 2017 with salmonella. So if you're handling mangoes, papayas, mamami, guava, lychee, jackfruit, and starfruit, then again, this is what you're going to have to be doing in the way of records. It even talks about eggs, because some people do eat raw eggs. Some people use raw eggs to make some type of hollandaise sauce, béarnaise sauce, and so therefore there is no heat step. So if these eggs had salmonella enteritidis in them, like they did in Iowa in 2010, where the actual person who was housing the chickens that grew to be the hens that then laid the eggs wasn't testing these chicks for salmonella enteritidis in their ovaries, and therefore the salmonella would be inside the egg, not necessarily on the outside of the egg where we wash it off when we wash and grade eggs. So eggs, again, is on that list. So you say, okay, that's the list. So if it's not on that list, do I have to keep these requirements? Well, yes, if you are using any of those in your products, or you're buying a product with these reused, because we've got to keep data all the way back to where they were grown or raised in the case of chickens and eggs, or fished in the case of fish. We got to have records of who received them, who processed them, who shipped them, and we even have to have records at retail. So therefore we can go from the beginning to the end, or back from the end to the beginning, and know exactly where all of these ingredients came from, and therefore who has got the contaminated ingredient in their product, and we've got to get it out of the marketplace. So now we're going to talk specifically about what you need to have in the way of records. And these are called key entries, key data entries that need to be made. So for fruits and vegetables, for each food on that list that we just went through, the proposed rule. Now I want to again talk about the fact that this is currently a proposed rule. So therefore you don't have to do anything right now, but it would be a good idea to be starting to do something, because the final rule may not be much different than the proposed rule. And once the final rule comes out, as we'll talk about later, then we get into what do I have to do, and now I have to do it by law. The proposed rule currently would require the grower of the food to establish and maintain records containing and linking the traceability lock code of the food to the following information. Where was it grown? Was it grown outside the country? Was it grown inside the country? Which farm was it grown on? Which part of the farm was it grown on? Seeing in some cases, farms are enormous and they have lots of fields, and it may only be coming from one part of one field. So therefore, would you want to recall all of the product because of a problem with the product? No, you would like to be able to narrow it down. And when you can't narrow it down, the FDA expands the recall to cover everything that could possibly be contaminated. So when you receive it for each food, so now we move to you receiving these products coming out of the field, coming from the shell egg facility, coming from the seafood facility. For each food on the food traceability list that is received, the proposed rule will require the receiver to establish and maintain records containing and linking the traceability lock code for the food to the following information. The location identifier and location description for the immediate previous source, not the truck that brought it in, But where did you buy it from? Did you buy it through a broker? Did you buy it directly from the farmer? Did you buy it from a farm that's in a foreign country? And therefore, each entry number assigned to the food if imported. So therefore, on the importer records with the Customs and Border people, there's a number that has to go on there, and that's the number that you would start to use. So therefore, you would be able to prove if you're bringing in this lettuce or you're bringing in this fruit, exactly where did it come from. And if you're buying it through a broker, you would need to make sure the broker has that information. And if you're not the FSBP importer, which is the Foreign Supplier Verification Program importer, then the broker needs to have this information. Somebody needs to have this information to give to you because you need it as the receiver. Because you're going to keep records on this, and then you're going to have records you're going to create in your facility, whether you're just a distributor or whether you are a retail store and buying directly from a farm, let's say, or whether you are a processor and you're going to use these ingredients in one of your products. What you have to know is how much did you buy? How did it come in? How many cases was it? How many tanks of it, if it was a liquid? How many pounds was it? You've got to be able to trace it back, and you've got to now say how much you got. Therefore, you know how much you brought in. You know when you brought it in. You knew the lot number of it, and that's traceable back to the previous person who supplied it to you, who, if they have to trace it back, they can go back one more step. Everybody's got to be able to go back to where they got it from, finishing up back in a field, in an orchard, whatever. And you have to be able to pass on information in a minute so that the next person can keep going. Now, where you're going to keep these records, we'll talk about that later, because some of these records can be on your invoice, the information can be on the shipping thing. You're going to have to decide, and the FDA in the final rule will basically hopefully keep it flexible so that you'll have many places where you can record this data, but you've got to record it, and you got to make it available to the regulators when they come in. You need to know who transported it. So the name of the transporter transported the food to you, because again, that may go back to where they got it from, and that may go back to where they shipped it to as other companies who took the same ingredient as you did. So what is the word transformation? Transformation is the word for foods on this list. The transformer of the food will be required to establish and maintain records containing and linking the new traceability lot code of the food produced through transformation to the following information. So again, you are now transforming it from the original ingredient, and you are now making a product out of it. And now you have to keep track of what you put in that product. And it may be a mixture of different things on the food traceability list, but it also may be things that are not on the food traceability list. But now you're going to have to keep track of this product because it has things in it that are on the food traceability list. And again, how much did you make? And therefore, again, what's going to be your code, your lot number on this type of thing? And again, this is going to be how much did you make and what type of containers was it in? And therefore, again, you can account for every pound of product that you finished up making. Now, obviously, you're going to lose some of the product because as you slice, dice, chop, there will be obviously loss in water. You'll have stuff fall on the floor. So it won't always quantify that you brought in 100 pounds and you finished up with 100 pounds in the finished product, but you know what your shrink is. But whether you make 90 pounds out of every 100 pounds, where's that 90 pounds and where's it going after you ship it out? So therefore, there has to be records that will enable you to do this. So what is creation? Creation is the person who creates the food will be required to establish and maintain records containing linking the traceability lot code. And I'll talk in a minute about what actually creation is, different transformation. But again, anytime that you're doing anything, you're going to have to keep very good records. And you may be doing that right now. And you may very well be doing traceability tests where you have been doing for GFSI. Let's say, for example, you've been doing a traceability one back, and you've been in a traceability one forward. And that may be your role in this new proposed rule. But be sure the person you're getting from is doing some traceability, and make sure the people you're shipping to are doing some traceability, because if anybody in the middle of this process from farm to consumer doesn't do what they're supposed to be doing, the whole system will obviously just stop. And that has been one of the problems in the past. Some people do not keep good records, and therefore they do not have the information. They don't exactly know where it went. They don't exactly know what they do know where it went, how much went there, etc. So therefore, when you ship out, you're going to have to keep shipping records. And shipping records are how much are you shipping, where are you shipping it to, and what's the lot number. So if the FDA walks in and says, how much product did you make? You say X. And they say, where did you ship X to? And you say, well, half of X is still in the cooler, and the other half went to 5 different customers, and they got, let's say, 10% each. Then you have done what you need to be doing, and you can show records. The FDA will then go to the next step to see if they acknowledge that they got that amount from you. And therefore, what did they do? Did you pass on an ingredient to another food processor who then did something else with it? Did you ship it to a retailer who then opened it up and used it in the deli case or a salad bar? In other words, can the people after that? Now, you're not going to be held accountable for the fact that they're not doing what they need to do, but you are going to be held accountable if you're not doing what you need to do. And remember, that applies to imported food. And when we consider how much food we import, the records say from statistics that about 16 to 18% of all our food is imported. The thing about fruits and vegetables and seafood, the numbers are much higher. It's about 45% of fruits, about 55% of vegetables. It's about 80%, and I saw just recently there's some calculations that maybe 90% of seafood is coming from outside the country. So it's extremely critical that we know what you're getting from outside the country. In case the problem originates from outside the country, then we need to know exactly who got it, where to go, because it doesn't matter who's supplying you with it. We want to get that ingredient, that product that used that ingredient, out of the marketplace. And the only way we're going to be able to do that rapidly is to have a system by which you can almost just push a button in a computer and it will spit out all the information that is required. And the FDA, in a matter of hours, day at the most, can start to find where all the product went. And that's why when we talk about this, it talks about location identifier, location description. Where was the food shipped? What was the date and time that it was shipped? What was the quantity that was shipped, etc. And so therefore, again, it'll talk in minutes about how you want to keep these records. You're going to get some flexibility, but you're not going to get the ability not to keep records. And therefore, the transporter is going to have to keep records as well on where they're taking some of the stuff to. So in addition to keeping all above records, the shipper would need to send all of these records, with the exception of the reference record type and number and the transporter's name, to the immediate subsequent recipient. So what does that mean? You've got to send your information on to your customer, because if you don't send them information that allows them to relate back to what you did, whether you just brought in an ingredient and then passed it on as a distributor, or you brought in an ingredient and made a finished product out of it, they've got to be able to come back to you with information that will tie into your record keeping. And then they've done their job on receiving. They haven't done their job on processing until they keep records on processing, and they haven't done their duty with regard to shipping if they're not keeping shipping records. So it all ties together. It's almost like a big chain where you're trying to make sure that everything linked together gives you the picture all the way back to the grower, to the harvester, to the person who's bringing the fish out of the sea, etc. And therefore, if the shipper is a farm, they would also be required to send the following information, if applicable, to the immediate subsequent recipient. A statement that the shipper is a farm, because the farm does get some exemptions. but they still have to provide you with the information about where was the product harvested from, which was the location of the farm, what was the field, and if they can narrow it down to half a field, particularly if some fields are extensively large, then this would be real helpful. If not, the whole field's going to be recalled. And if they can't go to an individual field, they may be recalling all of that crop coming out of several fields. And I don't think that's good business for them for that to happen. So what we talk about in shipping, the business name, point of contact, phone number of the harvester of the food, if not the shipper, and the date of harvesting. I don't want to spend a lot of time getting into all this because we want to wait to get the final rule, but I want you to be aware of what you're going to have to be doing. And when the rule goes into effect and becomes law, you will have to do it. It will not be optional. These are not guidance documents when they're finally put in the Code of Federal Regulations and they're published. They're going to actually be the law. So again, it talks about the location identifier and location description. We're saying the same thing over and over again, but we're saying it at different stages. So let's talk about the critical tracking events. Because obviously keeping records is one thing, but if they're not able to be used to track, then obviously the system's not going to work. And if in this chain there's a broken link, it's not going to work. And the FDA has found that even those keeping good records, they're not always linked to where they got it from, and they're not always linked to where the product went. And so therefore it becomes a major problem for the FDA to find a product quickly. And in some cases, it's taken them months and even half a year or so to try to get back to a farm to find out where the contaminated product came from and where was the source of the contaminant. And it usually turns out to be irrigation water or something like that. So what are these critical tracking events involve? Growing, receiving. Now we're going to talk about somebody called a first receiver. And you may be a first receiver, but then you won't. You may not be. We're going to talk about the definition of transforming, creating, and shipping. So who's a first receiver? Well, you can only be a first receiver if you're actually getting the product, the ingredient, or the product from the people who are actually growing it, raising it, catching it like fishing, harvesting it, and gathering it like shell eggs. So if you're getting the eggs from a distributor, the distributor would be the one buying it from the farm, and therefore the distributor would be the first receiver, and you wouldn't. And so therefore they've defined who's going to be the first receiver, because that's basically when the records are going to start to mean something. Who got the records from the farm, from the egg laying facility, from the fishing boat, and they're therefore able to go back to the actual source. That is so critical here, because after that, everybody else keeping good records fails to get you back to where did the fish come from? Where did the eggs come from? Where did the product in the fields come from? So what is creating? Creating is defined by the FDA. Now, these are the FDA definitions. Making up and using foods on the food traceability list using ingredients that are not on the food traceability list. So therefore, you're using a lot of ingredients in addition to ones that could be on the food traceability list, but you're making a product now with different ingredients, some on the list, some not on the list, but unfortunately now your product is now on the list because it has got it's got ingredients from the food traceability list. So what are you doing when it talks about transformation, which is basically what most of you will be doing? You're going to be doing something like cooking, cutting, commingling, repacking, repackaging. And therefore, you're going to be creating a lot code. You're going to be creating a label. You're going to be creating something that's traceable. What's it traceable back to? Where did you buy the ingredients from? And therefore, how much did you get in? Why did you use it? Where's the finished product, etc.? And that's called transformation. So the traceability program, you say, okay, what about records? So if this stays in the way it is, and we'll talk a minute about where it is, what records am I going to need? They're going to have some ability now to create these records, save these records, and make these records readily available when the FDA asks for them, and they're going to ask for them real quickly. They're not going to give you days to go find your records. So what are these things? These are called key data elements. Now, you can have them on the bill of lading. And so therefore, if you're going to keep those and you're going to somehow scan them into a computer and they're going to be available and they've got the key data on them, on who sold you what, how much they sold you, what day you got it. On purchase orders, if the information would be there, and I'm not sure you're going to have it on purchase orders. You may have the quantity, you may have a description, but I'm not sure you're going to have things like the lot code, because that will be what comes on the bill of lading. Your production logs, certainly they're going to be a valuable place on where did you use. So what are we heading to here? We're heading to, most likely, you're going to be scanning stuff into your facility using barcodes. We're going to be scanning the ingredients into your product. We're going to scanning your product into a package. We're going to be scanning the packaging material that goes and the product goes in. We're going to be scanning the product into a case, and we're going to scan the case out. A lot of manufacturers can't do that, but I'm going to tell you that's what you're going to have to start to do, particularly here. But I think the whole industry needs to do this, not just for this food traceability list. The company's written program has to say which method. So which method you're going to use is up to you. But make sure it does capture all the information that's needed and it's reliable, and you can trust your supplier that the accuracy is there. Because if somehow they use the wrong lot number, the system's going to start to bog down. Now, you're going to have to trust them because you're not going to be sure. But then if the lot number on what you're receiving doesn't match what's on the bill of lading, that should raise a red flag straight away. So you're going to have your receiving people basically looking to make sure that everything matches coming in with the information on the bill of lading, right down to the lot number. For shipping, this will include a product description for each food and its traceability product identifier, which in most cases is going to be a lot number. Now, if you want to use a sell-by or best-by date, I'm not sure if that's going to be in the final rule, but we can see how many options you're going to have for that. Is it going to be a lot number? Is it going to be, could it be a sell-by date? What could it be, so I can basically make sure I've got the records and I know exactly what the product was, how much I made, and exactly where it went to. Now, records have to be kept as either the originals, which means generally they're talking about a hard copy. So hard copies are still acceptable. But most companies are moving towards electronic records. Now, remember, with electronic records under FSMA, each person who enters the data into the computer has to have their own password. So therefore, it's traceable back to that person. So if you have 3 receivers, let's say three receivers are entering some data, each one of them has to have their own password. Otherwise, you're going to get one employee say, that wasn't me, it was the other employee. And the FDA says that makes an electronic record not acceptable when it can't be traced to an individual, not to a job title. The same when you're shipping. Make sure that, again, when you're doing production records, that they're traceable to the person who is actually entering the data in the computer. As most records have to be verified, the verifier has to have their own password as well. If you don't have that sophistication, then that's fine, but electronic records won't be acceptable. And therefore, if you want to make electronic records acceptable, because it makes life easier, because then you can get the records to the FDA much quicker, because you can push a button and hopefully be able to generate the records in a matter of minutes. If you're going to keep your record, now what is true copies? True copies means that if you're going to make a copy, it has to be a copy of the original, not a copy of a copy. Now, I'm not exactly sure how you tell with such good copy machines these days that a copy is a copy of a copy and not a copy of an original. But that's the definition of a true copy. If you're going to keep the records off-site, then you can do that. But you've got to get them back within 24 hours to the FDA. So the key thing is, do you really want to keep them off-site? If you do, that's okay. But if that's a hassle trying to get them back within 24 hours, then you can't keep them off-site. You may be asked to provide an electronic sortable spreadsheet. So therefore, the FDA may say to you, I want them electronically. I want them in a sortable spreadsheet so they can sort and manipulate your records. They won't change your records, but they can manipulate and data sort them. And if they ask you for that, you're going to have to be able to do that. So again, the point is, how sophisticated is your record keeping? How sophisticated is your computer system? How much money do you have if you have to upgrade things? That type of thing. Now, as usual, the FDA always has the ability for some people to have exemptions, but the exemptions only come in at retail right now. Again, this is proposed, so it may change. If a retailer employs less than 10 full-time equivalent employees, now what does that mean? You could have 5 part-time employees and they work 20 hours a week. You could have 5-time employees who work 20 hours a week as well, who are different, and that adds up to 5 full-time equivalent employees. So that's what they mean by full-time equivalent employees. Option 2 means that they may give you just a partial exemption, which means that they'll say, you're so small that we're not going to charge you with having to have an electronic sortable spreadsheet. We'll give you an exemption. I'm going to have to wait and see, can I get a full exemption? Can I get a partial exemption? And the chances are you may be able to as a retailer, but you're not going to get the exemption at any other stage. So what is the proposed timetable? You say, okay, when do I have to do all this? It sounds like an awful lot of work. Sounds like I'm going to have to do things that right now I think I can do, but now I'm going to have to do it because it's going to be the law, and now I'm going to have to provide data sheets, and now I'm going to have to make sure I can get the records, and I better make sure that I know everything and I know where it came from and where it went. Well, the proposed regulation was put out there a year or so ago, and then along came COVID. And so it's obviously been moving very slowly, but the comment period actually closed on February the 22nd of this year. So that means that the FDA is not accepting any more comments on the original proposed regulation. So what are they doing now? They're reviewing the current comments they've got. They got a lot of them. You can understand they get a lot of them. Some people are pushing back, some people are suggesting different things, some people saying we want our product taken off the list, and others saying you didn't think about that in this product. I'm assuming they've got a whole smorgasbord of comments. When was the final rule anticipated? This fall. Well, I was just at the IAFP meeting in Phoenix, which happened this week, Monday through Wednesday, and I just got back from it. And the FDA was there virtually, and they basically talked about this, and they said that they're not going to be able to meet this final rule by the fall of this year. So I'm going to say the final rule was anticipated fall of this year, but they think it'll actually be into next year before the final rule comes out. Now, what happens when the final rule comes out? Do you get a right to have a comment? Yes. It's a little late, but you still get a chance to comment on the final rule. So there'll be a comment period that'll be opened up. I can't give you dates on this because the FDA was not committal to dates. So let's say instead of it being out in the fall of 2021, it's out in the end of the first quarter 2022. Then they'll have a comment period. Now, how long that'll be, maybe it'll be shorter, maybe it'll only be a couple of months, or maybe by the end of the first half of next year, they'll have all the comments in. Then they have to consider those comments just to make sure that they want to make any changes, or they're going to just reply to all of the comments and say, no, the final rule is what we proposed. The final rule is not going to change. And then they're going to publish it in the Federal Register. So publishing in the Federal Register, we thoughts were that that would happen by the end of 2022. But I have to tell you right now, it may be into 2023 before they publish the final rule. Now, when they publish the final rule in the Federal Register, it actually doesn't become law for 60 days. So let's put an end of January of 2022 on the final rule being published in the Federal Register. Well, that means it will be the end of March 2022 before it actually becomes law. Now, there's a difference between becoming law and being implemented. The FDA in the past has tended to give companies time to implement before they made it, I'm coming in to look at you. I'm not sure they're going to do that, but let's say they are going to do that. If they do it based like on the rest of FSMA, they'll give 1 year to major companies. So that could make it the middle of 2024. With medium-sized companies, they give you 2 years, middle of 2025. And small companies, they could be 2026. So I'm going to tell you, I think that you got to get ready. You got to be aware of it. You've got to prepare yourself for it. It wouldn't be bad to start doing the records now, because actually, if you finish up with a recall, it's in your best interest to get your product out of the marketplace pretty quickly. But when it comes to when the FDA is going to come in and start looking at you, it may be 2024, 2025, 2026, depending on the size of your facility. But it is coming. I don't think there's any doubt about it. It's not going to just go away. And maybe the list will increase. Maybe the list will decrease. Maybe it'll be fine-tuned. But our purpose of this webinar was to just bring you up to speed on what's coming so that you can get prepared for it. So I'm going to send it back to Kim and see if we've got any questions, and anybody wants to ask any questions or wants more clarification.
Yes, Bob. Thank you. We'll be taking questions momentarily.